President Biden says he's taking his case directly to the American people. This is partly in response to his waning approval ratings.
The president has seen a significant drop in support over his first year in office. The Biden administration faces labor and supply chain shortages, rising inflation, and several surges in coronavirus cases since entering the White House.
CBS News chief political analyst John Dickerson joins us now for more on this. John, thank you so much for being with us. You know, every White House does at least some retooling after year one, but I want to ask you about President Biden's change in strategy as he described it in his press conference last week. Take a listen.
The problem here is that I think what I have to do in the change in tactic, if you will, I have to make clear to the American people what we are for. We passed a lot. We passed a lot of things that people don't even understand what's in it, understandably.
Now, if that sounded familiar, it's because what every president says when they're facing low approval ratings, right, John? I just need to talk about my success more.
It is a malady that afflicts all presidents. If you go back and look at Obama, Bush, Clinton, even Jimmy Carter, when he gave his famous crisis and confidence speech, the so-called malaise speech, it was to try to explain to people, and if they could just get through to people, they would understand. This is a result of the strong biofeedback that comes from campaigns where candidates talk and then they get elected. And so the biofeedback is so strong, they think they can do it again. The problem is that in our shredded news environment for President Biden, this is the particular problem, but it's presidents, that they have to get people's attention. And it's hard when inflation is one of the issues that people care the most about. It means every time they check out at the store, it's a potential negative campaign ad against President Biden. There's also just the distraction of the ongoing COVID pandemic and now Russia threatening to move into Ukraine. So it's hard to break through all of that. And then what political scientists will tell you is, unfortunately for presidents, and this was true for President George Herbert Walker Bush, who faced a tough economy, the news coverage tends to be about things that are bad, not things that are good. And so President Biden heads out into the country facing all of those enormous headwinds.
John, you mentioned inflation a moment ago, but unemployment is down and wages are up. So why doesn't the president believe he is getting any credit for his economic achievements?
He thinks there's a disconnect, and there is, between what he has done and what the country thinks. If you look at what President Biden has achieved in his first year, he has passed more legislation, just in dollar numbers, than his predecessors. He has lowered unemployment is at a relatively good level, certainly relative to where it was during the pandemic. And then if you're a straight up partisan, he has gotten more judges confirmed through a Senate that has a worse margin for him than his predecessors. And he's signed all kinds of executive orders that matter for Democrats and their priorities. He's not getting a lot of credit for that. In fact, among Democrats, his numbers are quite weak, and particularly on these questions of the economy. So his argument, his belief is that there is this disconnect, and also the fact that there's plenty out there for people still to be concerned about that hasn't been addressed, and that's going to take some time. In his press conference, it was extraordinary how many times he pled basically for patience from the country. And in our current political environment, there's not a lot of excitement for a message that says, hold on, hold on.
John, the president acknowledged in that 2-hour press conference last week that people are frustrated. They're dealing with inflation and the pandemic and supply chain shortages and school closings. But can going out and talking to the country more really help his approval ratings? I mean, doesn't he already talk to the country a lot?
Well, as any of us know in our personal relationships, it's quite difficult to believe something that what they believe is not quite so. Some people find that insulting. And so already, just from the beginning, if the president is going out to the country and telling them that he has done more for voters than they think he has done, it's already a situation that's difficult. And also, some of the things that he's done have not set the country aflame with enthusiasm. If you look at one thing, the child tax credit, which the White House believed once you delivered that money to families that they would receive a political benefit. And certainly from a policy perspective, it has changed the face of child poverty. But from a political perspective, in December, there was a Marist poll that showed only 47% of the country was interested in continuing it. So here you have a policy program that has done a lot to ameliorate poverty. And yet, as a political matter, it's not something that's making people think Joe Biden is delivering for them.
So, John, what is the biggest challenge that the Biden administration faces right now? And do presidents generally have the luxury of focusing on one issue at a time?
Well, you put your finger on it, Elaine. The biggest challenge right now is Vladimir Putin potentially moving into Ukraine, because that's a series of decisions the president has to make that only a president can make, and that are incredibly fraught and that are of the moment. The secondary challenge is that if people are concerned about inflation, there's not a great deal the president can do immediately to handle inflation. His answer is essentially pass my Build Back Better legislation. That isn't going to make people feel like their immediate problems are going to be fixed. Even if he's able to make a case for it, it's a case that takes some time. And his ability to affect inflation is out of sync with people's demands for a faster fix to inflation. And so that makes it very difficult. And finally, going out and telling people that the employment situation, which is quite strong, and CEO optimism is at a 12-year high, going out and telling people that is not something that is going to immediately make them excited.
So how difficult will it be for this president to turn things around? I mean, you're a student of the presidency. Has any previous president been able to reverse this type of a downward trend in the past?
Well, Harry Truman is the patron saint of presidents who are stuck in the mud, and he's the best example of this. Now, Truman in 1948 did this when he was on the ticket. 1946, Democrats were devastated by Republican victories, and in fact, Truman essentially ran against the Republicans. Somewhat, we've seen that from President Biden in his press conference. He was raising the fact that Republicans didn't have a plan, he said, and he repeated that a lot. It reminds me of when he said, don't judge me against the Almighty, judge me against the alternative. And what he was trying to do is basically get people to not think of this as a referendum on him, but to think of this election as a choice between two different parties. So that's one thing he can do. But the thing is that that only has so much limited utility because it tends to excite the base of the other party a lot, which means you're going to excite them as much as you may excite your own. And finally, what Truman had that he doesn't have is political machines in the states and unions that were very powerful and able to get voters out in a way that just doesn't exist now.
Well, John Dickerson, patron saint of political insight, thank you so much for being with the two of us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Elaine.